Hi, it's Katrina. Ancient garbage dump. Archaeologists in Egypt have discovered an ancient garbage dump inside a temple dedicated to one of the most powerful female rulers in history. The garbage dump was uncovered in the Hathor cult complex, a massive three-temple structure inside the larger Hatshepsut temple near Luxor. These temples date back 3,500 years, back to the rule of Pharaoh Hatshepsut. What's really interesting is that the garbage dump proved to be filled with artifacts, things that people thought were just pieces of garbage thousands of years ago. Most of the artifacts discovered here date back to the New Kingdom, from between the 16th century and 11th century BC. What this means is that even though the garbage dump was made several thousand years earlier, people used it more heavily later. It was filled with objects that researchers say were probably left for deities by pilgrims who traveled from far and wide to honor the goddess of fertility. What were these offerings doing in the trash? That's where things get really bizarre and maybe a little familiar. The offerings were mostly given in honor of the goddess of fertility Hathor. But this part of the temple wasn't for worship, but a separate place to dump trash. Pilgrims and devotees probably brought all kinds of useless pieces of junk as votive offerings to Hathor. Then when they left, anything that wasn't worth keeping was thrown in the rubbish pile by the ruling priests. Drugs for power. A new discovery has proved that ancient Peruvian elites likely used alcohol and drugs to control their empires. A new study has revealed that for centuries, the ancient Wari who ruled the highlands of Peru from between 600 to 1000 used a mixture of drugs and beer to maintain political influence for centuries. The discovery comes in the form of a tree, a psychotropic tree found in an old Wari brewery. Archaeologists now believe the Wari combined intoxicants from the tree with those they already used in an alcoholic drink called chicha. The combination would have taken the drink from an alcohol content of about 5% and turned it into what was basically an acid trip. It was archaeologists with the Royal Ontario Museum who made this shocking and bizarre discovery at a former Wari village called Quilcapampa. They uncovered hallucinogenic vilca seeds from the tree. The experts now theorize that the Wari used their hybrid drink to make friends with chieftains and rulers all throughout their kingdom. They consolidated power over them by manipulating them with drugs, and back in those days would have been considered a spiritual journey. The drink would have given an out-of-body experience, which would have allowed everyone participating to form extreme bonds that just otherwise wouldn't have been possible. During that time, the ones with this drink had the power, since it made everyone believe they must be closer to the spiritual realm. The oldest dog tooth. Archaeologists have uncovered the tooth of the oldest known domesticated dog in the Americas. It happened in the last place you might imagine, at the Haida Gwaii archipelago off the north coast of British Columbia in Canada. Archaeological investigations here have uncovered ancient human settlements from 15,000 years ago. Back then, this wasn't an archipelago, but just another part of the mainland. This means much of the coastline is now submerged, and many of the settlements where some of the earliest North Americans lived are lost underwater. Archaeologists excavated limestone caves in the area. They discovered a fossil record inside 3 caves dating back from between around 14,500 and 11,000 years ago. They found bones from brown bears, deer, caribou, and fish. They also found that many of the bones had been gnawed on by some kind of carnivore. Not only that, but they recovered ancient spear tips used by hunters and stone tools. And in one of the caves, they found the tooth of a domesticated dog that lived approximately 13,100 years ago. This is a lot to unpack at once. The point is that the dog tooth seems to be direct evidence that humans brought domestic dogs with them when they migrated to North America. This is the oldest proof we have now of this theory. It's also quite interesting because most of these kinds of discoveries happen in the United States, but this happened far in the Canadian North, where the original migration to America would have happened before the ending of the Ice Age. 2 giant sphinxes. In the ruins of an old pharaoh's temple, 2 giant sphinxes have been uncovered for the first time in thousands of years. The sphinx is a mythical beast with the head of a person, the body of a lion, and the wings of a falcon. And while the Great Sphinx in Giza is definitely the most famous, There are plenty of examples of these strange monsters to be found all over Egypt. These newest statues, new in the sense that they were just found, are colossal. They were built of limestone and likely intended to depict an ancient pharaoh. They are so massive that it's a wonder they weren't discovered earlier. One of them reaches a height of over 26 feet. It was only revealed thanks to new restoration work being done on the statues of Memnon in Luxor at the Temple of Millions of Years. This temple is a vast complex that was dedicated to King Amenhotep III, sometimes called Amenhotep the Magnificent. He ruled Egypt in the 14th century BC, in what is known today as the Golden Age of Egypt. This was when the old empire was at its height of international influence. The colossal limestone statues seem to depict the great pharaoh himself. He must have had his builders carve his face onto the huge sphinx statues, immortalizing him for eternity. A very old penny. A 16-year-old kid accidentally became an archaeologist thanks to an artifact he found in his lunch money. Don Lutz Jr. from Massachusetts purchased lunch at his school cafeteria in 1947. At the time, the kid didn't think anything of the change given by his school chef. He had a handful of copper pennies, and that was good enough for him. What he did notice was that one of the copper coins was colored a little differently than the others. This was what made him hold on to the penny. 72 years after buying lunch at school, Don still had the discolored penny. And as it turned out, it was one of only 20 copper coins accidentally minted as part of a manufacturing error during World War II. At that time, the U.S. Mint was pressing coins made of zinc-plated steel rather than copper because copper was being rationed for wartime materials. Copper was needed for things like shell casings and telephone wire. Experts believe only 10 to 15 of the 20 coins still survive today, and Don had one collecting dust in his house for almost 80 years. It was his descendant who realized how much the coin was worth and decided to put it up for auction. It sold for over $204,000, attracting 30 bids. How much would you pay for a rare coin? Let me know in the comments below. Ancient drinking straws. Researchers with the Russian Academy of Sciences have identified the world's first drinking straws. The straws themselves were actually found in a burial mound in 1897 during early excavations of a Bronze Age site in the Caucasus. The straws couldn't be identified when they were first found. Archaeologists thought they were just strange, long silver and gold tubes with no real purpose. They dated them as being over 5,000 years old, then just kind of stashed them away in the archive. Only now have researchers taken a good look at straws and figured out what they were used for. The tubes, each one about 3 feet long, were used as part of a bizarre ceremony. People participating in the ceremony were given enormous straws to drink beer out of a huge communal vessel. Imagine if you and your friends went to a bar and you only got one giant tub of beer and all of you had to drink out of it with straws longer than your legs. This is more or less what was going on. Experts don't know exactly what kind of ceremonies involved everyone drinking beer out of a massive vessel, but they must have been pretty important. An ancient toy. In the ancient city of Gdansk in Poland, archaeologists were excavating a very old latrine, which doesn't usually make headlines. But there is always the chance of finding something unexpected when looking at ancient bathrooms. The team got a little surprised when they found an object shaped like a phallus, which they believe may have been used as an adult toy 250 years ago. Oh my! Because of where it was found and the material it was made out of, archaeologists don't think it was used in religious rituals or left as an offering for a god. Archaeologists were looking at an old school of swordsmanship and determined the relic was made in the second half of the 1700s. There is no arguing what it was made to look like: the male reproductive organ. Archaeologists measured it at 8 inches long and discovered it was made from leather and filled with bristles. It's definitely one of the weirder artifacts found at the site, where previously archaeologists have found things like wooden swords used for military training, pieces of pottery, and even jewelry. As for what the object was doing dumped in an old latrine, that's anybody's guess. A spokesman for the Regional Office for the Protection of Monuments said the object may have been dropped by accident while somebody was using it, or discarded to get rid of the evidence. Whatever the case, whoever had been using the toy must have been wealthy. It was made of the highest quality leather, so it was likely pretty expensive, and considering this was the 1700s, it was also probably quite hard to come by. Representations of the phallus have been around for thousands of years, dating back to the Paleolithic era. During Roman times, phallic imagery was everywhere, as not only was it erotic, but it was used in people's everyday life to ward off evil forces. How did it work? The idea was that a bizarre phallic form was so weird that it immediately drew the gaze of the evil eye, and thus protected vulnerable people from its wrath. Mammoth graveyard. In Britain, experts have unearthed an exceptionally bizarre graveyard, not of humans, but of mammoths. They found the remains of 5 ancient woolly mammoths from 200,000 years ago at a quarry, 2 adults, 2 juveniles, and a baby mammoth. The dig began after a pair of fossil hunters accidentally came across the hand axe of a Neanderthal. Officials with dig ventures then got involved and began excavating the entire quarry, at which point they found the huge burial complex filled with mammoth bones. They also identified multiple stone tools used by the Neanderthals. The findings by themselves aren't that unique, but together paint a rather exceptional picture. Researchers are now trying to figure out why so many mammoths were discovered in one place, although most think they already have the answer. Considering all the Neanderthal tools nearby, it makes sense that these animals were hunted by prehistoric humans and then butchered for their meat and hides. The Neanderthals then dumped whatever they couldn't use into one giant pit. Either that, or the Neanderthals came upon the graveyard by accident and scavenged what they could from the already dead animals and just left their stone tools behind. Which one do you think it was? Let me know in the comments below. Portrait of Jesus. Archaeologists have found a very old wall painting of a young Jesus Christ in an abandoned church in Israel. The wall painting dates back 1,500 years and was found in the ruined structure of a Byzantine church in the middle of the sun-scorched Negev desert. The ruins of the church are nothing new. Archaeologists have known about this place for at least 150 years, but it wasn't until just recently that researchers finally identified the very faint image of the shockingly youthful Messiah on the wall. His face had been right there looking at archaeologists for decades, but nobody had ever figured out who he was. It was art historian Emma Mayan Feinar who finally realized the painting depicts Christ. The ruins of the church were first discovered in 1871 in the abandoned farming village Shifta. This place peaked in the 6th century, but was active for 650 years before that. The painting was found above the baptismal font, and it's unique for one main reason. It shows Jesus when he's really young and has very short hair. Most images we have of him are when he's older, a little disheveled and with really long hair. But this picture basically shows him with a short perm. The painting is also unique because it's one of the only surviving images of Jesus from Israel's antiquity. The Byzantines had actually prohibited religious imagery. Most of the paintings of Jesus still around come from much more recently, from after the Byzantine Empire had fallen. Raunchy Roman graffiti. Ever since archaeologists started investigating the ancient Roman city of Pompeii, they've been finding graffiti. On walls all throughout the city, the very same one that was decimated by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, there are scribblings left behind by the Romans. Some of this graffiti is shocking to say the least. A lot of it is also extremely inappropriate, especially to those with Victorian sensibilities. Perhaps what's most surprising is just how relatable the ancient Roman graffiti in Pompeii is to the graffiti you might find at a modern bus stop or scrawled onto any bathroom stall. For example, archaeologists have uncovered flattering portrayals of local prostitutes etched into walls. They have found horrible insults aimed at people's enemies. They've even found angry phrases directed at politicians. And perhaps the most relatable thing of all, they have found the declarations of multiple people saying, "So-and-so was here." Your teenage self writing your name on walls was just carrying on the tradition from thousands of years ago. Before the eruption that preserved the city like a volcanic time capsule, graffiti was rampant. Most of it has faded away, but archaeologists have found remnants on pretty much everything. But among the crudely drawn pictures of reproductive organs and the mean things said about people's wives, archaeologists have also found rays of hope. Some graffiti was of a much more pleasant nature. For example, they found one piece of graffiti saying, "Health to you, Victoria, and wherever you are, may you sneeze sweetly." Clearly, the people of Pompeii had many complex layers. Another piece read, "Sanius to Cornelius. Go hang yourself." Secret Nazi base. A group of Russian scientists have made an outrageous claim, saying they found the remnants of a secret Nazi base. Where did they find this mysterious base? On a random island in the middle of the Arctic Circle. The scientists had gone there to do their own research when they stumbled upon over 500 artifacts left behind by the Nazis. This has led them to believe the island was once a base called Schatzgraber, or treasure hunter. There have been rumors about the base ever since World War II, but nobody really believed it existed. Now, looking at how much evidence was discovered on an island named Alexandraland, gas canisters, bullets, the ruined husks of bunkers, it looks like the base may have been the real deal. As far as historical records show, the base posed as a weather station in the Arctic, built in 1942 on direct orders from Hitler. This was right after he invaded Russia, but nobody ever found physical evidence of it up until just now. It was abandoned just a year later in July of 1944. The stories explaining the reason it was forsaken claim that staff at the site consumed undercooked polar bear meat, and they found themselves contaminated with roundworm. They ended up so sick and poisoned that they had to be rescued by a U-boat. Apparently, after the submarine evacuated the soldiers, the site was abandoned and no one ever went back. Disappearing shipwrecks. World War II shipwrecks have been disappearing without a trace. According to marine archaeologist Beverly Goodman, these mysterious shipwrecks are vanishing worldwide, but they aren't simply disintegrating into nothing. They are being raided by humans. It's a practice known as metal piracy, with salvagers actually diving down and pillaging the metal from forgotten shipwrecks from World War II. To them, shipwrecks are great big pieces of cash just waiting to be picked apart and sold. After all, these ships are huge, filled with brass and metal and copper, and heaps of electrical equipment that can be sold for a huge profit. To give you an example of just how much money these shipwrecks are worth, look at just one bronze propeller. It can go for tens of thousands of dollars at a scrap buyer. A single wreck can be sold for nearly $1 million if picked apart properly. The result of this thievery is that researchers have been finding shipwrecks either cut in half or completely gone. It's tragic because there are still plenty of shipwreck hunters out there trying to find lost vessels from World War II. Yet when they go down to find them, the ships are gone because someone's already found them, cut them up, and sold them for cash. What do you think of this practice? Let me know in the comments. Secret assassins. Freddie Overstegen joined the Dutch resistance when she was just 14 years old. A couple years after that, she became one of the most dangerous armed assassins in the country. She joined forces with her sister, a younger woman by the name of Hannie Schaft, and together they killed German Nazis. But they didn't just kill them. They lured and ambushed them in a way that, had this not been war, would have been pretty disturbing. It was May of 1940 when the Nazis invaded the Netherlands. The occupation would go on until the very last days of the war. According to historian Jeroen Pleister, the girls never did admit exactly how many people they assassinated, but we do know that they used their youth and innocence to literally get away with murder. Freddie in particular was an expert in the art of deception. She once seduced a German officer with the SS so that another fighter from the resistance could sneak up and shoot him. She was the real deal, hunting and killing Dutch collaborators and anyone who endangered the lives of Jewish refugees. Have you ever heard of her? Let me know in the comments below. Hitler's anti-gravity machine. Hitler had a secret anti-gravity machine that he apparently procured from space aliens. Oh, and the United States stole it. At least that's the legend behind Die Glock, the extraterrestrial weapon developed by Nazi scientists to turn the tides of war. Die Glock, which translates into English as the bell, is likely nothing more than the product of a mysterious crash in the 1960s and the endlessly churning rumor mill of online UFO enthusiasts. There aren't actually historical records of the Nazis having a wonder weapon that could manipulate gravity. The first mention of it appeared in a German sci-fi book in 1960. It then came up again in 2000, detailed in a book written about old Nazi technology by a guy named Igor Witkowski. But it was just shortly after that when Nick Cook wrote a book including an anti-gravitational time machine that was part of an SS program. Again, all science fiction. Yet the rumor of such a bizarre weapon persists today, with people even linking it to the Kecksburg incident of 1965, when a UFO supposedly crashed in Pennsylvania. The Amber Room. The Amber Room is without a doubt one of the most mysterious treasures from World War II. It was designed for Charlottenburg Palace by a renowned German architect back in 1701. Construction commenced by a pair of master craftsmen to create the most beautiful room ever built. It was installed at the Berlin City Palace, where Peter the Great of Russia saw it during a visit in 1716. To forge an alliance with Russia against Sweden, Friedrich William I gifted it to the Russian Empire. It took 10 years for the Amber Room to be installed at the summer house of the imperial family. Of course, this wasn't just any summer house, it was Catherine Palace. The installation was such a pain because there were over 6 tons of amber with a value of over $240 million that had to be moved. But the room was full of more than just amber. There were also architectural features, carvings, gold leaf, statues of angels, and mirrors designed to illuminate the room in a golden glow using nothing but candlelight. When the German forces invaded the Soviet Union, they disassembled the Amber Room and removed it. Hitler felt the Amber Room belonged to Germany, since it started out in Germany all those years ago. They transported it to Königsberg Castle, where it sat for 2 years. Then Hitler gave the order to bring all that amber somewhere deep within Germany. It remains a mystery what happened to the Amber Room after that. The castle was firebombed by the Royal Air Force in 1944. The collection of amber was allegedly on a train back to Germany when that very train disappeared. Nobody has seen the treasure in almost 80 years. Where do you think it could be now? Tell me your theories in the comments. The bizarre Army Air Force mascot. In World War II England, a live coyote became the unofficial mascot of the Army Air Forces. But how did an actual coyote become the inspiration for a group of British airmen? It all started thanks to John Crump, an American pilot who flew 3 different planes during the war. He also smuggled a live coyote pup onto his ship when he left the US for England. The coyote's name was Jeep, an orphan adopted by Crump just before he was sent to battle. When they arrived in the United Kingdom, Jeep was welcomed with open arms by the members of the 356th Fighter Group at Royal Air Force Martlesham Heath Airfield. He was given his own dog tags, he flew on 5 missions in Crump's P-47 Thunderbolt, and he became an inspiration for all the other airmen. Sadly, Jeep was run over by a vehicle in Ipswich after his 5th mission in October of 1944. Jeep was then given a proper burial with full military honors. A memorial plaque was erected, and it can still be found at Playford Hall to this very day. It goes to show just how unlikely many of the heroes in the war really were. Operation Mincemeat. Operation Mincemeat was a secret mission pulled off by British intelligence officers during World War II. It was actually one of the most successful deceptions ever achieved during wartime. It happened in April 1943, when a decomposing corpse was found floating near southern Spain. Personal documents revealed him to be a man named Major William Martin with the Royal Marines. He had a black attaché case handcuffed to his wrist. Now, keep in mind that Spain was officially neutral, but sort of pro-Germany during the war. It didn't take long for Nazi intelligence to learn about a mysterious floating officer with a briefcase chained to his wrist. When the body was searched, they found a letter written by military authorities in London, meant for a senior British officer stationed in Tunisia. The letter indicated that the Allies were preparing to cross the Mediterranean from North Africa to attack Greece and Sardinia, which were both occupied by the Nazis. It was all a trick. Hitler transferred German troops from France to Greece after hearing about the letter. He thought there was going to be a massive invasion by the enemy, but the drowned man was actually a vagrant whose body was taken out of a London morgue. The body was then transported by a race car driver to a Royal Navy submarine who dumped it off the Spanish coast. That was exactly when British authorities began a desperate attempt to recover the body and the case he was holding. Their efforts to supposedly try and get a hold of the case convinced the Nazis that the documents were real. As a result of the operation, the Nazis were completely blindsided when 160,000 troops invaded Sicily instead of Greece, and there was no one there to stop them. This secret operation directly led to the fall of Mussolini and was one of the first major steps in turning the tide of war in favor of the Allies, the Freemasons. Amongst the millions of people that the Nazis tried to exterminate, they also had it out for the Freemasons. In the 1930s, the Nazi regime began spreading bizarre conspiracy theories about the Freemasons, calling them liberal intellectuals and saying they needed to be destroyed. Their secretive circles of influence would no longer be tolerated. When it came to wartime, the Nazis did what they did best. They began to systematically hunt down and eradicate the Freemasons. While they were committing these heinous acts, they collected a vast trove of Freemason artifacts going back to around the 17th century. They managed to get their hands on over 80,000 items from Masonic lodges, houses of Freemasons, and so on. It's now, according to museum specialist Juliana Grasinska, the biggest Masonic archive anywhere in Europe, and it's still full of mysteries. But why did the Nazis hate the Freemasons so much? It was because of ideology. They were very anti-intellectual and anti-elitism, and Hitler loved spreading ideas of the occult. The thing is that he had to be the one in charge of all the info, and the Masons were pretty much the exact opposite, a group of intellectual elites. But the Soviets also hated the Freemasons and even banned their practice under communism. What's pretty interesting is that Freemasonry was to Germany and Russia what communism was to the United States during the exact same time. What do you think it is about the mysterious and secretive Freemasons that appears so dangerous to certain governments? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Operation Gunnerside. Operation Gunnerside was one of the most incredible secret missions of World War II. It was straight out of a James Bond movie. On February 27, 1943, 9 Norwegian commandos went to work. They infiltrated a hydroelectric plant held by the Germans. The Vimork plant was owned by a company called Norsk Hydro, but the Germans had taken control of it and were trying to keep that fact a secret. But the Norwegians weren't having any of it. Their mission was to destroy the water pipes in the basement. They had to destroy them at all costs, although at the time they had no idea why. The Germans were using the plant to produce heavy water, or deuterium oxide. It's a special water molecule the Germans were hoping to use instead of graphite for creating an atomic bomb. When they had taken control of the plant, they shifted all production to heavy water. They were desperate to make the first atomic bomb the world had ever seen, and this plant was critical for their success. The Norwegian commandos jumped from a plane under the cover of snowfall at about midnight, but they missed their mark and had to walk for 5 days through the snow just to reach the plant. They then broke in, divided into different squads, and set bombs throughout the plant to sabotage the water pipes. Straight from a Hollywood movie, the team escaped the building with just seconds to spare and skied away down the side of the mountain as the explosion went off behind them. They then traveled over 200 miles to Sweden using nothing but their skis. Every single member escaped successfully, and the water pipes were destroyed. Philippine gold. There is said to be a secret treasure hoard of gold from World War II hidden in the Philippines, but then again, the gold may not even exist. The story of the gold goes back to General Yamashita, a Japanese commander who had been stationed in the Philippines and was notorious for hoarding all the gold and valuables that his soldiers took during raids. Yamashita, near the end of the war, became desperate to hide his collection of gold so that he could come back for it later, or at least so the Americans couldn't have it. He allegedly oversaw the burial of millions of dollars worth of gold loot that had been collected throughout Asia during the Japanese offensive. Yamashita then held out against the American forces for a few weeks before being forced to surrender in 1945. Yamashita was captured, tried for war crimes against humanity, and executed in 1946. He never said where his gold was, but people are pretty sure it's in the Philippines. It could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but nobody has ever found it. Do you really think there's a secret stash of gold hidden in the Philippines? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.
A fisherman and his pocket knife. In Australia, a man fishing on the bank of a river, and on his very own property, mind you, got into a life-or-death battle with a crocodile. He was armed with nothing except his fishing rod and a pocket knife. The crocodile, however, was armed with 2 rows of extraordinarily sharp teeth, as well as millions of years of evolution that has made it an apex killing machine. News reports said that the man was around 60 years old, hardly in any shape to be fighting off a hungry reptile. His name hasn't been released due to privacy reasons, but we know the incident happened on McIver River in North Queensland. We also know that the crocodile surprised this man, lunging out from the water and attacking him by biting his legs. The crocodile grabbed him by both his feet. Then, according to the Department of Environment and Sciences, it tried to drag him into the river. The brave and quick-thinking fisherman grabbed a low-hanging branch from a mangrove tree and tried desperately to hang on. Then, he pulled a move straight out of an action movie and whipped out his pocket knife. He repeatedly stabbed the beast in its head before it finally released its jaws and slipped back into the water defeated. The man then crawled up the bank to safety where he was able to get help. He did, however, end up at the local hospital with minor injuries. Luckily, the crocodile didn't maim or kill him. How do you think you would react if a crocodile grabbed you? Let me know in the comments below. Dog fears. A teenager was almost killed in one of the most brutal dog attacks ever in downtown Toronto, Canada. 13-year-old Mohammed Al-Mutaz was at a taekwondo studio when the outbreak occurred. He was taking a class on taekwondo at Black Belt World, where there happened to be a resident American pocket bully named Blue. The owner of both the studio and the dog is Tommy Chang. According to what Mohammed told local news, when the class had finished, he told the instructor that he was scared of dogs and that he didn't want to go near Blue. Mr. Chang then said that it would be better if the boy conquered his fear and approached the dog. The instructor told him that if he didn't overcome his fears, he would never be a national champion in Taekwondo. So Mohammed did just that. He approached the dog, staring into its eyes, and then it jumped on his face and bit him. The kid needed dozens of stitches to get his cheek back into place because the dog had torn it up so badly. The doctors have also told him that because of the scars on his face from the dog bite, it's likely he will be permanently disfigured. Instead of getting over his fears, Mohammed is now scarred for life and severely traumatized. Animals can sense your energy, and if you're scared, they're going to be scared too. Rescued from a goose. Dogs aren't the only things that attack people in Canada. The country also has a bit of an issue with rampaging geese. In Edmonton, a man walking his dogs and minding his own business accidentally wandered into the territory of an angry goose. The man's name is Robert Bray, and he was parked in front of his portrait studio when the shocking attack went down. He was preparing to go inside with his 2 dogs when a goose came flying out of nowhere. It was hissing, flapping its wings, making all kinds of horrible noises, and then it attacked his dog. His dog went crazy, but the small canine was no match for the giant goose. Robert was desperately trying to unlock his door to get his dogs out of there, but the goose was making things impossible. The only thing that saved him was his next-door neighbors, who allowed him to run inside their business to seek shelter from the goose. But it still didn't let up. It was attacking the window, viciously trying to break inside so it could finish what it started. The nightmare wasn't over until one of Robert's employees showed up and saved the day with a shovel. She managed to shoo the furious bird away. And from now on, Robert is a little more careful every time he shows up to work. Crab hunter in the creek. A crab hunter in India was searching for some yummy crustaceans to eat for dinner when the unthinkable happened. Instead of securing his own dinner, a Royal Bengal tiger came out of the bushes and decided it was going to dine on the hunter himself. The crab hunter and 2 of his friends may have brought this misfortune down on themselves, seeing as they were fishing for crabs in an area that is a known tiger habitat. The forest officials said the habitat is out of bounds for humans, so they shouldn't have been there in the first place. But whether they were supposed to be there or not, all 3 men had a pretty bad time. The crab fishermen suffered head injuries from where the tiger tried to make a meal out of the men who had wandered into its habitat. The 2 friends in his boat managed to get away without any injuries. Plus, they were heroes. They saved the fishermen from certain death by reportedly fighting hard against the tiger, and effectively scaring it off. To give you a better idea of how this happened, keep in mind that the three men were on a boat and that the tiger jumped into it from the watery mangroves. It would have taken the crab fisherman underwater and then swam away with him if it hadn't been for his friends pushing the huge feline into the water. They successfully scared it back into the mangroves, where it vanished. Alligator dog attack. There has been yet another horrifying alligator attack in Florida. This time, a woman walking her dog became the victim of a violent gator ambush. According to the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the victim was 43 years old at the time of the attack. The alligator slithered out of the water and tried to snatch her dog, but missed. At the last second, the woman managed to pull her dog to safety, but as she did so, she slipped, and her foot flew out in front of her and went straight into the alligator's mouth. The alligator then tore into the soft flesh of the woman's leg, causing her to fall over. In her haste to save her dog, she accidentally got herself bitten. Thankfully, this all went down in a neighborhood, near a small lake that is surrounded by houses. A witness was able to call 911 while the victim's friend used his pants to make a tourniquet. That's how bad the bite was. The woman was bleeding profusely. The alligator was estimated to be at least 7 feet long, making it an absolute beast. The victim thankfully didn't lose her leg. Alligator attacks, though not extremely common, happen more often than you'd expect. After all, there are alligators in all of Florida's 67 counties. These animals are just something that people who live in the state deal with day to day. The Florida Wildlife Commission recently estimated there are about 1 million of them. Lisa and the Great White Shark. Lisa Mondi had a rather unpleasant encounter with a great white shark while wakeboarding off the coast of New South Wales in Australia. A vicious great white surprised her and tried to bite off her arm. This happened a while ago, back in March of 2011. She initially fell off her wakeboard and into the sea, and was left treading water as she waited for the boat to return. As she waited, the shark approached. It came from below, silent and invisible. When it clamped its teeth onto Lisa, she hardly even knew what was happening. It started by biting her face and neck, then moving to her left arm and ripping out her branchial artery. Before the boat even had a chance to turn around, Lisa was already dangerously close to bleeding to death in the water. The boat did eventually make it back to Lisa. She was then rushed to the hospital as quickly as possible. At first, doctors feared they would have to amputate her arm. Just one bite from the shark had ripped into the muscle so savagely that her arm was barely hanging on. She had to undergo several different operations in which doctors struggled to properly fix up her arm so that she might use it again one day. Thankfully for her, their attempts were successful. But the most shocking part of this story is that after all of the trouble, Lisa went back to the very same place where she had originally been attacked. She went diving in an underwater shark cage to try and find the predator that almost killed her. Lisa wasn't going to let a shark attack keep her from the water. Trampled by a camel. In Texas, 2 people were tragically trampled to death at a local farm in an unusual case. One of the victims happened to be the owner of the farm, 72-year-old Peggy McNair. The other victim was Mark Meir, who had gone into the animal pen because their water trough had frozen over, and he was trying to make sure they had water to drink. Sadly for both victims, the male camel took their intrusion as a direct insult against himself and became violently aggressive. The camel was in something called rut, which is when a male camel is in its peak time of sexual excitement. It viewed the 2 humans as competition for its mating rights and went ahead and attacked them. The camel charged Mark as he tried to escape the pen, and Peggy tried to close the gate to save him, but both were too slow. According to reporters, by the time the deputies arrived at the scene, both victims were already dead, and the 3 camels in the cage were going berserk. The male camel was ultimately put to death as a result of the incident. Romanian brown bear. In Romania, a bear killed 3 men in just over a month. A fisherman was killed in early October, a man was set upon near his home late that same month, and a shepherd was killed at the edge of a forest in central Transylvania as he tended to his flock just after that. For the year, that brings the total fatalities by bear attacks to 6. However, there were plenty more non-fatal attacks reported that never wound up in the news. As you can probably tell, this is a shocking number of bear attacks. It's especially shocking considering between 2000 and 2015, only 11 people were killed by bears in Romania. The bear population is increasing, according to gamekeeper Carolee Pal, and the politicians of Romania are now desperately trying to get rid of them. The issue is that the brown bear is a protected carnivore in Europe, making it illegal to kill them. Romania got the short end of the stick because they have the largest concentration of them, somewhere around 6,000 of the potentially dangerous predators right now. Bears are damaging cars, ruining crops, killing fishermen, and causing general mayhem. They've even started to cause car accidents because there are so many of them wandering across the roads. Poor bears, they don't know what's going on. Man versus seagull. An appalling scene was captured on video recently showing a fight between a man and a seagull. But this scary animal attack is a little different than the other ones I've told you about today. In this case, the human is actually the aggressive animal. The footage was taken in Devon in the UK. A group of tourists were watching the flocks of seagulls flying around the seawall when they witnessed something that nobody should ever have to witness in their life. There was a man standing by the seawall, and he looked like a local. He had a donut in his hand, but one of the seagulls snapped it out of his grip and threatened to fly away with it. Before the seagull could get away, the man grabbed it by its neck, and then he went on to strangle the seagull with unbridled violence. He strangled the seabird in full view of bystanders. When he was done strangling the poor bird, he then threw it over the seawall like a piece of garbage. To wrap up the carnage nicely, he then picked up his donut and continued to eat it. The tourists were more shocked than anybody because the guy looked at them, licked his fingers, and acted as if he had done nothing out of the ordinary, as if strangling a bird isn't a completely insane response to attempted donut theft. A deadly pet. A man named Daniel Brandon, 31 years old, died inside his home near the town of Basingstoke, Hampshire. The cause of death was asphyxiation. The thing that asphyxiated Daniel was his very own pet python, an animal that he called his baby. Its real name was Tiny, a female African rock python that was discovered near his dead body. According to coroner Andrew Bradley, there is absolutely no doubt that Daniel Brandon died as a result of his rock python wrapping itself around his throat and literally squeezing the life out of him. But what makes this terrifying attack especially tragic is that Daniel had been keeping snakes for at least 16 years. Tiny was only one of 10 snakes he had in his room, along with a small collection of 12 tarantulas. His mother told local news that Daniel had been keeping Tiny since the snake was small enough to fit in his hand. At the time that it killed him, it was 8 feet long. And yet the attack came out of nowhere. Daniel never felt he was in danger, never had a confrontation with the snake, and then one day, everything just changed. Daniel was found unconscious on the floor of his bedroom with the snake coiled underneath the cabinet. As far as we know, the African rock python showed absolutely no remorse. Thanks for watching! What's the scariest animal attack you've ever experienced? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. We've got lots more videos coming up. See you next time. Bye!